We are talking about a book today. It is written by the esteemed comic book writer, Alison Bechdel. I'm not going to say the title of the book out loud for the same reason I don't sing rap lyrics out loud. But it's
Do you
Alison
want me to say it,
Bechdel.
Oliver?
If you want to, you know what? That's the kind of allyship I appreciate, Juniper.
The essential dykes to watch out for.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Alison Bechdel is a um, very famous comic book writer, very, I don't know what the word is, storied, historied, I don't know, but she's been around for a long time. Recently has gotten a lot of acclaim for writing some memoirs, Fun Home and Are You My Mother? Which I have actually not read. I have not read either of those. But this specific comic, um, I nominated or, kind of submitted it as one of the submissions when we were voting on new comics. And I did not end up picking it because I picked my other book, Uzumaki. But John Davis, who is not here, was kind enough to select it. I first heard about this book, I think, sort of the same way that probably a lot of hetero comic book readers did, which is from its association with the Bechdel test, which I assume most of us have probably heard of at this point. But this is the comic where that came from. And it's incredibly long running. She wrote this thing for like 25 years. And I think it's pretty cool. I enjoyed it a lot. I think I would give it probably. I'm like, I don't know if I'm quite at a 9. I'm like in between an 8.5 and a 9. I'm going to say 8.75. I will probably be convinced to raise it to a 9 by the end of this meeting, but for now I'm going to go with 8.75. I think it is very, very good. So why don't we jump to Carlos?
I really love Allison Bechdel. I think she's one of the I don't know. I think about Fun Home and I think about this book and like, you want to talk about range. It's just like an extremely tragic family memoir. And this, which is sort of both pointed, but also like very funny, like not daily comic strip, right? But like comic strip. I don't think anybody else can sort of make that claim about being able to do both and being able to do them well. And even if Fun Home never existed, this would stand on its own. I'm going to give it a 9. Popcorn. June.
I'm gonna feel like a really bad dyke for this. I really liked Fun Home. I really hated Are You My Mother? I think those were maybe like a 9 and a 1 respectively. And I find this has like very little to do with either of them and also slots in the middle of them. I don't hate it for the reasons I hated Are You My Mother? I don't like it for the reasons I liked Fun Home. I found it really endearing and really funny at points. But I stopped a quarter of the way through and just, I don't care where the characters are going. It was maybe because it was like a lot of these short, quick stories, but I just felt like I'd read what I needed to and like I didn't really need to keep going. And so yeah, I read a quarter and felt fine. Also, it's obviously edited and compiled, and a lot of strips are missing. And right on page 2, there's a tranny joke that's A, not necessary, and B, the plot isn't necessary of that strip. And I found that editing choice really unfortunate. I understand why that joke might have been made and thought to be acceptable in, was that 87, I think, when that strip was? But I see no reason for its inclusion, especially considering that there's no essential plot in that strip, except that it's the second strip in the series. So giving it a 6. I'm willing to have my mind changed about reading the book, but at this point, I don't find a need to. Can we get Keith on the line?
I actually read this as a kid. It was in like a indie comic or a indie newspaper that was at Borders, which is ironic because they make fun of Borders. But yeah, I would just read every comic. So I read this, and you know, back when it was for a while, it was still around. I'll give it a 7, and I'll give the jokes a 4 because sometimes they'll be funny, but sometimes they'll be really bad. Like I could tell he's trying to be a joke. Yeah, it's yeah, you do get to a point where like she kind of like hits a stride. I mean, like it's an ongoing comic, and you know it's a soap opera comic, and it's kind of hard to just keep it going. I guess after a certain point, it's like, you know, there's this sort of inertia, but I do appreciate that it also kind of importantly, like, you know, as she talks about in the introduction, like, you know, these were all like weirdo characters, and now they're all stock characters. Like, you know, I never imagined that, but yeah, like as June says, like up to a certain point, it's like you kind of know who these characters are, and you know, you can flip through it, and it doesn't matter. Like, there's an ongoing plot, but yeah, I did it at the beginning. It was also very dense, and it took me a long time to get through all of it. A lot longer than I was expecting. Which is, I think, part of the reason Lucy's not here is because it took me a lot longer to get her the book to her. But yeah, so it was just, you know, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite thing in the world. So I think it was good, and I can see why it's important for lots of people, but I will select Mike.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, you guys have already talked about a couple things that I was going to mention. I would probably give this a 7 or an 8. I also, I guess I started too late, and I did not get through more than maybe a quarter or a third of it.
It is very dense.
It is so dense. And, you know, I was thinking about it. I also was around when it was first published and read it every once in a while. I think it was in the Metro Times. And, you know, it was meant to be read once every week or once every couple of weeks to have, you know, almost 400 of these things all like end to end. It just kind of, it just doesn't strike me as something that should be read like straight through. It's kind of like the new Justice League movie. Don't do it. Don't try to do it all the way straight through. It'll wear you out, you know? I have to say though, irrespective of it being dense and not having finished it, I plan to continue working on it. I found it, for the time that it was published, a revolutionary in that it does a great job normalizing lesbians and their community to, you know, standard heterosexual people. There's a lot that's changed in the last, what is that, 35 years or so. But I think it's very effective in viewing a community and understanding how it functions and how it works. And I think that it was a really important work for her to do. So I liked it in that respect. I will go with Alex.
All right, so I did not finish the book either. I only read the first about 100 pages or so, but I'll give about a 7.5. That was pretty funny and well drawn. And I found myself relating to Mo more than I probably should. But yeah, I liked it. That was pretty good. Patrick, how about you?
Start with a 7. that's negotiable. I enjoyed the art. I particularly liked just even with how unproduced it was, and that's not a bad thing when I say unproduced. Like unproduced, the art was like you could still like distinguish characters, which I thought was very important. And that's actually a thing that she's able to maintain throughout the life of the strip. As far as the content, I guess I may need help from the crowd in thinking my way through comedy, because I'm experiencing what I'm calling the Silicon Valley problem, like the TV show. And that problem is like these characters are characters I probably wouldn't like in real life, but this is like a comedic thing. So like, how do you deal with that? Like, is it mocking them, or is it more like, so I don't know, like I just need help like kind of talking my way through that particular thing to come up with a more accurate score. Because like I invoke Silicon Valley just to say like, I hate these characters, and the writers are like sort of like portraying them as kind of foolish at times, but at the same time it's still lionizing them. So like, how does one deal with that type of a thing?
What do you mean by lionizing them, Patrick?
Like,
can you give an example?
Like,
because I don't watch the show. So.
Oh, I mean, and it's here too, where it's like Mo, for example, right? Like on the one hand, you can tell, like I think Bechdel is making fun of herself, really, but at the end of the day, like she's still the hero of the story, or maybe she's not. I don't know. So maybe like I need help with sort of peeling that layer of it and thinking through it.
The vibe I get from Mo, and I kind of went on like sort of a roller coaster.
And then we're going to our
Mo.
Discussion now. So
we're jumping into it.
Yes. And I just want to, before we continue, Oliver, I just want to point out
Yes.
that Miss Bechdel is the recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant, which is kind of a big deal. So
she's probably smarter than like all the rest of us.
Genius, Oliver. It's in the name of the award. So I mean, genius. But anyway, continue.
I went on kind of a roller coaster of like liking Mo, and then I started out liking Mo, and then I because I don't know, she's kind of neurotic, and she's kind of a sad sack, and you know I sort of relate to that in a certain way. No. And then like she just and then I went from like liking her to hating her, because there's this period, like especially in the first half of the book, she gets better later on, but in that first half, she's just she's so fucking detestable. She is just completely just like preachy, and she constantly judges other people. She constantly criticizes them. She's incredibly prone to just like, self-pity and wallowing in her own misery. And she's this like horrible friend to all of the people in her life.
Yes.
Yeah. But she does get better. I mean, she never totally changes, but she does get better.
What makes her get better? Because I saw her, she had that relationship with, I can't remember the blonde woman with the...
Sydney?
Harriet.
Sydney? Harriet. Yeah. So she has a relationship with Harriet, and then I pretty much stopped reading right after they break up.
Well, I would say that she gets... Like, I don't think her core personality changes, but I feel like she's able to modulate herself. I mean,
okay,
either that.
So she's not so anxiety driven.
I think so, or it's either that or like her friends.
It's not as strong.
Just adjusted to like who she is.
So she's softened a little bit, maybe, or
a little bit.
Yeah,
and she actually ends up in a relationship with a woman who is in many ways the complete opposite of her, which is interesting. So
okay,
but sort of just as intense in a very different way.
Yes, like her personality never like totally changes. She's still like the same person, but she stops being just so so completely abrasive all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think part of it is like Bechdel making fun of her qualities. Like,
yeah, I definitely get the vibe that Bechdel is that Mo is sort of like Bechdel, like making fun of her own like neuroses. I do get that vibe for sure.
And also like a place to put her opinions, right? Because the other, like, I think what makes Mo so frustrating sometimes is that she's like a lot of people in that she is not wrong, right? Like, I don't know if Bechdel actually voted for Nader, but like, of course, like Mo voted for Nader, and every reason that she gives for voting for Nader is like right, but it sort of misses the point. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can kind of like I can kind of relate to not just Mo, but I think other characters in the strip do this, like sort of like how like the outside world, and by that I mean like politics. Well, it's really mostly politics, sort of like infuses their everyday existence.
Right.
Which is a thing I can relate to from past November. So I mean, it's a thing,
Right.
but
Right.
I can't like putting myself in that headspace again. Like I don't know how you can be this on all the time. Like I would keel over
yeah.
from a heart attack. I cannot like I can't function that way. It's just like I need
Well-
5 minutes of NPR and then that's it. I need to stop.
Well, don't you think though
You know what
that
I mean?
that Bechdel is kind of like concentrating the relationships and the dynamics and everything because she only has like one page to get her point across like every couple of weeks. I mean, she had this continuing subplots and things like that, but any one of these pages could be like its own thing. I mean, you don't have to know what happened before or after. So she's really, I think that's why we all thought it was like so dense. I mean, at one point I thought about timing how long it took me to read one page from top to bottom just to figure out like, well, is this going to take me another like 6 or 8 hours to finish this book? Or is this something I'm going to be able to be done with this afternoon? You know, like,
Right.
I did start grouping them in like I started thinking about like what would be a good clump of stories to be like an arc, which is a very interesting
Right.
exercise that I engaged in.
I don't like, I sort of feel like Mo does have, I don't know. I feel like Mo's sort of development does feel like much more episodic, and it sort of revolves around like her different relationships. I don't know. I thought that the household, like the Sparrow, Ginger, and Lois household was more interesting and actually did sort of have like an arc. And the same thing with Tony and Clarice. Like those, like I feel like both of those like had more of like plot developments and like changes in their lives. And I don't know, yeah, like in some ways Mo is the least interesting character.
Yes.
Well, she probably, I
yeah.
think she develops the least too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because I mean I think we all think of, I don't know how true it is, but we all think Mo is a self-insert for the author.
A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
Huh?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we are agreeing with you, Keith.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like also she uses Mo to be her own soapbox, and you know some of the other characters can do that too, but like half the time, you know, Mo is like, this is what I think about this subject, you know, and she'll talk about like current events, and you know, it was fun seeing people get disappointed in Bill Clinton, you know, in not like in real time, but like you know, they're so excited, and then it's like, this is a real letdown. It's like, oh yeah, you can do that again. So like, yeah, so it's like, I think Moser's, you know, there's only one point where Alison Bechdel inserts herself, and there's like one comic where it's like the author has to talk about this, and it's just her talking and going on about, what was that? I think it was either September 11th or I think the
I think it was the Bill Clinton impeachment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that's the one you're
Yeah,
thinking of.
so the one where Bechdel herself appears, it's like
Yes.
Mo narrating.
And she's like losing her mind.
It was impeachment mixed with the bombings in Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Does anybody know what page that's on?
I can probably find it.
It's after the halfway point.
There's an index in the back, so I'll look there.
It's like somewhere. It's somewhere in like I think 1998. I want to say.
Yeah, I don't understand why that index was there. It was not helpful at all.
It's not comprehensive.
That index is like done by hand. You notice? I mean, it was like these are my favorite parts.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's most useful to see when characters appear.
Mm.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, because it's an ongoing strip where people might not have read it, they kind of do a good job of reintroducing and reorienting you to the same characters. I mean, you don't, and when you're reading 400 of them in a row, that's part of the reason why it takes so long. As Mike said, I mean, like you could pick it up and you might miss one, so you got to pick up, but infer what you've missed. And I mean, like, we also had to kind of do that because they did skip a number of comics, but yeah, so I think that's part of the reason why Mo, going way back, I think that's part of the reason why Mo was, she had two purposes. One was not just a soap opera character, but it was also, Bechdel using opportunity to proselytize and
yeah.
I mean, she, like Bechdel, if you look on the back, she refers to Fun Home at one point as half op-ed column and a half endless serialized Victorian novel.
Accurate.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I've never,
I mean, probably at the time, especially when it started, probably didn't have a ton of outlets, I mean, something like this getting picked up by the Metro Times and whatever newspaper it was that I was reading, you weren't gay news exclusively, so this was just kind of just another outlet, an entree into different outlets that might not, carry something like this. To discuss it outside of a comic strip, any of this stuff, any of these issues.
right.
I mean, it was also frequently mentioned, like post 86, like every 2 years there would be like a, article that's like, oh, like comics aren't for kids anymore. Like there was the same article that got released like from 86 to 2000.
Also, real quick, the page that Allison Bechdel herself appears on is 214.
Okay. But yeah, so it's, it had some, not necessarily mainstream, but it would get pointed out as, this is a worthwhile comic for adults.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where it was like well known in certain circles, like, sort of in kind of the more academic leaning comic book circles, and in sort of the like indie scene and sort of the more LGBTQ scene, but not so much the wider cultural landscape. Like, I think in the 1990s, the average person reading Marvel and DC comics would not have known what this comic was.
There was a really clear distinction. There's actually, here, let me see if I can find it. Give me 1 second. Talk amongst yourselves.
I don't know if we can do that. I'm scared. I feel so alone.
So this book is interesting. It's a sociology of of comics, like comic book reading culture. And it came out in 1999. But so when the author was like researching it and publishing it, he was basically said, you know, like a group like ours at that time didn't necessarily exist. Like there was a really clear demarcation between people who were reading, you know, Fantagraphics and like Drawn and Quarterly, and people who were reading Marvel and DC.
Is that so? Well, I guess this kind of ties into one of the discussion questions of like, how does this book like fit into the indie comic scene, you know, of the 20th century, which I guess you can extend from like the underground comics of the 1960s and 1970s, you know, up until the year 2000. I don't know, does this fit within that, or was it kind of its own like separate thing?
Looking back, it constantly reminded me of R. Crumb, but like progressed forward socially, and like of this like pretty despicable self-insert main character. And like the comic style is like has like some similarities through line, but that's what it reminded me of. So I feel like it was a pretty solid fit in that kind of like alt comics counterculture publications.
Bechdel is a huge Crumb fan. There's a really great interview between Trina Robbins and Allison Bechdel, and Trina Robbins is interviewing Allison Bechdel, and like Bechdel mentions that one of her primary influences Crumb, and like Trina Robbins like basically like it's like watching somebody's brain crash and then reboot. Because like she hated Crumb, like they were contemporaries. She hated Crumb. And I mean, there is sort of an interesting, there's an interesting through line. Like Crumb is like sort of weird, and his like sexual desires are not like mainstream, and he sort of puts them on the page. In a weird way, if you sort of squint, and a lot of like female underground cartoonists like did this, it's like female sexuality is terrifying, and like queer female sexuality is even more terrifying. So this, I mean, I think she was right. Like at the time, this was sort of a radical act, and it's sort of amazing that she got it into like not mainstream newspapers, but like mainstream alternative weeklies.
I think this
mainstream is you can put
like,
naked bodies in, right?
Yeah.
Carlos, explain the concept of mainstream alternative weeklies.
No, I think like June said, like as mainstream as you can get while also like having naked bodies in it. Like
I mean, I think there's varying degrees of indie, right? Like it's not purely a binary state between indie and mainstream.
But what is the purest of indies?
I don't even know. Maybe Carlos can answer that question.
What, like in terms of comics?
Sure.
I think just Zines in general.
Yeah, I probably like self-published stuff. I don't know, like Matt Dahl's early stuff. I don't know, it was all like self-published in like little mini comics that he would sell in conventions.
They had an indie comic convention at the hotel. What's the one that's attached to City Club? What's the name of it? The something hotel in Detroit. That's right above City Club. But anyway, they had like an indie comic convention there, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it was just like a bunch of like local people who were like writing their own comics and basically like self-publishing them. And they were there, you know, kind of selling their stuff. I think that's probably like the purest form of indie, I feel like.
I used to do that.
I'm not surprised.
Yep.
I think that this stuff that Bechdel's put out goes like way beyond Crumb. I mean, when I was looking at Crumb stuff, it was just like he's so into himself and his own thing. Whereas Bechdel with this work is just like, she's exploring an entire community. I mean, the whole concept of Dykes to watch out for, right? It's just like, this is a field guide to educate people on lesbians and what they're like. And as she like goes through, and I think she says in the introduction, she found out that there's so much variance and so much, you can't classify them after a little while. I mean, there's so many different types of people out there, and it's more of an exploration of their community and how they relate to each other and get along, and as opposed to just like one person and their neuroses. I mean, if it was just Mo and all Mo all the time,
the comic would be unreadable.
But it would be more like Crumb, you know? I mean, it's just, this is really about a community, I think, than just like one particular person, which I thought was just fascinating. I mean, to really, I guess that's why it's kind of like a soap opera. You need like so many different characters all interrelating and mixing together to really have an limitless supply of stories.
I thought, I think yes, and it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of in an important cultural document because of that. There's also like almost this weird like Leave It to Beaver quality in the now go with me on this. Like, you know, like there's no antagonist in this strip, right? Like sometimes like people like fall out of favor with each other and eventually get back. It's like very community based. And I think, I don't know, I think that's why in some ways, like that's sort of reflected even in the cover. Like the cover is a takeoff of a Norman Rockwell painting. Like there's sort of like this, I don't know, like small town America feel to it in a way that is actually maybe what America like would like to believe that it is, which is like accepting and diverse. And I don't know, there's all kinds of things in here. Like it's racially diverse. There's also like the full range of what it means to be queer in America. There's different relationship styles that are discussed, which is like something that didn't happen in the mainstream. I feel like it happens more now, but I don't know. I feel like this was probably the most above ground thing that was regularly talking about like non-monogamy in whatever, like 1994.
I mean, she talks about that a lot. Like that's an ongoing concern for her, it seems, is like, should all the characters be polyamorous?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily all polyamorous. I think they are all in some way navigating monogamy and like what exactly that means to them. And different characters, I think, deal with it in different ways.
But going along with the Leave It to Beaver thing, are you saying that this is not the case? Like the way that this text portrays, quote unquote, the community?
I would not claim to be an expert. I am definitely an outsider. I think from my you know what? I'm not even going to opine.
Can I opine? Can I jump in on that? When I was reading this book, you know, you mentioned Leave It to Beaver. When I was reading this book, I was becoming incredibly nostalgic for these characters because there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's no video games to speak of.
There is later, though.
I'm sure there is later, but at the beginning, it's like the technology is so incredibly simple. People write letters to each other. They call each other on the telephone. It's just, there's this quality of connection that actually existed back then that it might exist now, but there's so much competition now, and especially with the quarantines that we've had in the pandemic. I mean, the sense of togetherness that's demonstrated in this, there was a lot of that going on back then that we just have a hard time getting now, just because of our technology, which brings us all together, ironically enough, but also tends to separate us. I was just thinking, I have a couple of gay friends, and we met them, and we keep up with each other on Facebook. They're a couple, and we went out to dinner with them. And the whole time we were out to dinner with them, they were on their phones on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I was really kind of disappointed because I was looking forward to actually talking more with them. But, you know, when this strip came out back in the 90s and 80s, I mean, you didn't have to worry about that when you went out with somebody, that they were going to take their phone out and start looking at it instead of talking with you. It's just, I don't know. Call me the old man is telling people to get off their front lawn.
One of the things also that, like, leave it to Beaverism is like, you know, Mo will, or the characters will talk about, you know, like being, you know, the prejudices and, you know, other things weighing down on them, and that's why they go and protest, and they're like, we're fighting for our rights. But it's, you know, a lot of times, you know, there's never any like real hateful actions taken towards them, I guess is the best way of putting it. I mean, I don't know what we missed in the not included comics, but, you know, for the most part, it's, you know,
There's
stuff that they're fighting for, but it's kind of like softened, I would say, probably from real life experiences.
Well, I suspect it has to do with like the tone of it, right? Like it's not
Right.
gonna be, it's not gonna get that real
Right.
in this space.
So I feel like there are a couple comics where they like directly deal with some form of like bigotry. You know, there's one where Mo and Lois get catcalled by some random guy after they get out of a movie. But like I think like there's kind of this like running through the whole comic, there's this kind of omnipresent like looming threat of this, you know, sort of right-wing fundamentalist extremism, which thank God that's over now and certainly doesn't exist in this modern day. But it's always kind of like, you know, it's always like off screen, so to speak. It's always sort of not abstract, but it like affects their lives indirectly. And I almost wonder if that's kind of maybe sort of an intentional choice, to say that there's like this like intense bigotry, but it's very systemic, and the characters face it in indirect ways rather than like some dude like shouting at them in the street. It's more in terms of like the laws and the way that things like adoption and marriage are being handled. I don't know. That's kind of my interpretation of it.
Yeah, no, the feel I got for it was that it's a comic by a queer woman for queer women about queer women, and so there's no real reason to bring in people who aren't that. Because even if they're a plot point, that plot point can be serviced through the mouths of a queer woman.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think one comic that I think of especially is like the most intense it gets is when Tony is at the park.
Right, with
park with Tony's kid.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody comes up and assumes that she's a nanny. And, you know, like that's his intensity. And then, as you say, it's like that woman just says like one thing, and then it's immediately Clarice's reaction and how she interacts with Tony. So, yeah, it's like one person. And then, as you say, it's, you know.
I feel like Raffi does, or like Bechdel deals with it through Raffi in a few different ways. And I mean, you know, which also makes sense, like as a kid, like growing up in the mid 90s. Like,
I think
a lot of like internalized homophobia and like, I don't know, in kids, like to this day, but like then it was sort of like vaguely accepted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think like Bechdel is she's very astute. And I think she's very good at empathizing with people, even if it's sort of a point of view that she might find repugnant in a way. And I think she does a really good job with Raffi of kind of like understanding sort of the way that like someone's mind works if they're, you know, a teenage boy in the mid 2000s, which is like, you know, like just kind of the way that environment, I don't know, forms you. And I think she never like condones it, but I think she kind of shows an understanding of how Raffi is sort of pushed in kind of that direction. If that makes sense. But
yeah, I think that is a good point, because it's like, as June said, this is a conversation. Why do we need to let the, you know, in internal community conversation, why do we need to let these people in? But Raffi is kind of a cipher to be a person who can have these conversations, but still be part of the community.
all right. And I mean, to kind of go to, you know, the first, you know, discussion question that I wrote, you know, about the comic and it, you know, does it feel relevant? You know, what are the ways it feels dated? I think the book feels, or, you know, the comic feels incredibly relevant. You know, I think with only a few exceptions, I don't think it feels very dated at all. I mean, there are, I think, some missteps that Bechdel does, especially early on. You know, as you know, June mentioned, there's a transphobic slur that comes up very early on. But as the book progresses, Bechdel, I think she does like, she seems to get a lot better and a lot more understanding about like trans issues specifically, and she, you know, there are trans characters that come up that are portrayed very empathetically and in a much more empathetic way than like basically any other media in the early to mid 2000s was doing. And the character of Lois is, you know, very defensive and like calls out the other characters when they start, you know, saying transphobic things. So I think Bechdel did recognize, you know, sort of the problematic aspects that can come up when discussing those things. And I think she was very ahead of her time in that regard. I think like as a whole for this book, it's almost kind of scary, like how relatable some of it was. Like a lot of the things that they talk about in this book are like the same kinds of things that they talk about now, you know, with like right-wing fundamentalism. They talk about militias. There's a page where they talk about Pat Buchanan, and the things that they're saying about him are the exact same things that people were saying about Trump in 2016. You know, that it's good that he's running. He's too obviously fascist to ever get elected. He's too unhinged. He's too fringe. You know, it's a good thing that he's exposing how unhinged the rest of the Republicans are. But he does have a certain populist appeal. And it's like, oh, God, nothing's changed. Time is a flat circle. All the problems that exist now, they existed 30 years ago. Anyway, but I panicked a little bit reading this book. I'm not going to lie.
But go ahead, Juniper.
Okay. I wanted to thank you, Oliver, for I hadn't gotten far enough to see the introduction of new trans characters.
Yes.
And so and to clarify, it wasn't a transphobic slur in that on that second page. It was just a joke at the expense. It was a transmisogynistic joke.
Yes.
But and that threw me right from the get, because there's a lot of feminist texts from the 70s and 80s that like I'll get into, and then like find out on page 2 the author is a giant fucking bigot towards trans people, and like I just kind of kept waiting for that shoe to drop here. So like it's really relieving to hear that that's not the case.
Yeah, and one thing that does happen is that there are characters, and Mo specifically does this, where they will say like literal TERF talking points, and then other characters, usually Lois, will call them out on it.
Yeah.
Lois is like very defensive of the trans characters in this book, and if like the other lesbians start like saying transphobic shit, Lois will call them out on it.
Okay. Yeah, I always thought Lois was an egg, particularly when they got their new haircut.
Lois has big trans guy energy for sure. Never comes out, which I was like totally expecting.
Patrick, you don't know what egg is? That's fine. It's not for the sissies.
Excuse me. Well, what is egg?
No, in 2021 is going to be the year that cis people use the word egg, so I may as well get it out of the way. It's a trans person who doesn't know they're a trans person yet. They haven't hatched.
Okay, all right. I get it. I get the reference now.
So,
like the GIF. Okay.
Yeah, when cis people take over queer language, I'm going to be the one responsible.
Is that a sign of the end times, Jim?
I think it's like the third seal. Yeah. But yeah, to the point, I have this kind of like running list. I'm not going to bore you all by reading it, of kind of political themes and social themes running through the book, and like the things that are still relevant outnumber the things that aren't, like 3-1, like Nazi and KKK rallies and the Protestant police state versus like, okay, there's not really an AIDS scare anymore and Mishfest doesn't exist, right? And like, it was really, like reading this book, I just felt like I was on Rose Twitter the whole time. And like leftist DSA Twitter, for those who might not know Twitter terminology.
For those who are not terminally online.
Like Oliver and me, it's a problem.
It's honestly a fucking curse. My brain is completely rotted out of my skull. I have no ability to relate to normal human beings anymore.
It's bad. But like I felt like this was like in a way like just hanging out with my like present day friends. A lot of the issues were similar, and like like Mo and Lois and like people are used as like talking points, as ciphers for talking points that are going on. None of them are like, I don't feel that any of them are necessarily given the grounds to be the right argument often, unless they're like obviously the butt of a joke. Like I think there's a panel where they were doing like a convention at a school, and they had to like make sure it was like handicap accessible. Mm-hmm. And like Mo was like, "This is stupid," and everyone's like, "Mo, you're fucking stupid. Shut up." But yeah, to the question, I think it's incredibly relevant, and I think it holds up really, really well. I think that's really depressing, actually.
I was about to say that too, because yes, it's still relevant, and two, it's so depressing because it's like, why, and
it's all the same shit,
and like
just stuck in this cycle.
And does the left need to rethink what we're doing? Because I mean, it's still painfully relevant, right?
I think what the left needs to do is fracture even further than we already have. I think we need to infight even more than we already have.
That's not what we need to do at all, Oliver.
No.
Wow, June, canceled.
I think we need. Cancelled. Oh wow, okay. Everyone else is canceled. I'm starting my own book club.
But sometimes it's like, you know, you do see how far you come, because it's like, I remember one of the early panels, Mo's like, at least we can't get married because, you know, and then that, you should make some reference about how they can't get married. I mean, like, gay adoption, you know, they talk about like how we can't have kids, and like how, I mean, yeah, no, it's very different.
Though I'm not sure if the characters would view that as a positive development necessarily.
Well, Mo's very explicitly anti-marriage.
Yes.
Personally, but she's I think like yeah, it was kind of weird because there's like the whole you can't get married, so you have a private commitment ceremony, then you have the civil union, and then you have the marriage. I mean, they talk about like Tony and Clarice have like 3 different events as their rights expand. But
how dare you, Keith? I need to be depressed unrelentingly. How dare you?
Yeah, because those things were like, yeah, we're past this. I totally forgot about this aspect where it was like no marriage, now it's civil unions, and now it's all marriage all the time for anyone. So yeah, it was like, yeah, that you do see some progress. It's something to celebrate in that aspect. I mean, if you want, I think at some point they do make a point like there's always something wrong in the world. Like, if you're focused on this, you can't be focused on, like there's war here, there's famine here, there's natural disaster here. Like there's always going to be something. So, there's always going to be suffering that's with us. And sometimes you just need to, I think they even make like this argument that you need to like celebrate good things. It doesn't diminish the bad things, but just to be human in this world, you can't just be negative all the time, which is a criticism. I think self-criticism of the author and her character Mo.
Yeah, and I think the way that I see the book being least relevant is like there's this whole in the intro, Bechdel poses this question of like, did we just become stock characters? Did we do all this to not be revolutionary and just become like everyone else? She poses this question. I forget exactly what the binary / dichotomy that she presents there is, and I feel like that arc, that narrative arc that exists in the real world also exists in the book through Clarice and Antonia as very assimilationist queers of like going to college and getting a law job and getting married and having a kid, and like they feel like they're doing a lot of good things, like but they feel very assimilationist, at least through like the 100 pages I read.
That only gets like even more. They go through like a whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I found that arc kind of that arc that Bechdel worried about being played out through those 2 characters, and I found that is the way in which I find the book the least relevant, and that like these don't feel like revolutionary things anymore. They do feel very like it's very leftist still, don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm not going to go to Howell and like find this community, but I'm going to go to Ferndale and find this community.
And I think Bechdel, like as the series goes on, because again, this comic takes place over the span of like 25 years. She wrote it for an absurdly long period of time. Mm-hmm. I think she does like reckon with those things. And I mean, those characters you mentioned specifically, Tony and Clarice, they do kind of like, there are other characters who do criticize them for, like selling out and, becoming soccer moms. And they do sort of like reckon with like living in a very heteronormative environments and like kind of the pressures of being this nuclear family. That is definitely something that Bechdel is thinking about.
Yeah, that was pretty obvious to me, like even in the first, quarter of the book, because it's just like these plot points are just like, oh, well, here's the character. There are 2 characters that are, together. One of them goes away to a funeral. The other one cheats over the weekend. They come back, they reconcile, they get married, or they have their commitment ceremony. It's like any of these plot points you could take from any soap opera anywhere and just kind of like stick them in there. And if Bechdel's purpose was to show that these are just regular people, I mean, she's accomplishing that with relatable subplots, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is basically a soap opera. I mean, it's kind of, a lot of the drama that exists. I mean, Pat said there's, basically no antagonist, right? So a lot of the drama that is created is from these conflicts in these interpersonal relationships.
Well, Carlos said that, but he was correct.
Oh, it was Carlos, not Pat. I apologize.
It's all right.
I mean, and maybe there is something to just be said for a queer anti-capitalist soap opera to exist, period. For like, not just to exist, but to exist for like 25 years.
Yeah. And one of the things that I have been realizing as I get older, and I'm sure to a lot of people this is very old hat.
How old are you, Oliver?
So
right now.
I am well, did I say a lot older? Look, I'm 26, okay? So I'm
Alexander are the youngest ones here by like far, by like almost a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I'm just a little tiny baby. But anyway, no, I like when I was a kid, like I don't know, you don't really encounter a lot of like leftist media. So like when you're a kid, the Democrats are left, you know what I mean? And like you think anything farther left than that is like this incredibly fringe position. And the older I get, the more I realize that just like historically that is just completely wrong. And people much farther to the left than that are way more common than public education wants you to believe that they were.
I don't know. Like I did forensics in high school, so I guess I reached that peak like much earlier. Like I've gone full circle to the like, I don't know. Like I'm more of the persuasion that like like people are just people, and I think there's nothing more. God, that sounds so trite when it came out of my mouth. Like
And
like,
assimilationist, Patrick. Come on.
I know. Like I don't know there's anything more revolutionary than maximizing people's choices and like whatever those might be. I don't know. And if the choice is to shack up in the suburbs, I support you.
I mean, only so long as like by shacking up in the suburbs, like you do not take away that choice from other, I don't know. I am a dedicated anti-capitalist, so take whatever I say with like that hanging out in the background. But like having that even as part of, to bring it back to the book, like having that as even part of the conversation is sort of like amazing. Like, and even like Sydney, who is like Mo's later partner, and who I think is vaguely based on like Bechdel's like longtime partner.
Oh.
Who is?
Sydney?
Oh,
apparently.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sydney also kind of sucks as well.
Excuse you, Oliver. Excuse you.
I mean, am I wrong? Am I wrong, Pat?
I think you are.
I mean, but it's interesting having like
I don't like. I'm not saying that she's like a terrible person, but she definitely has pernicious aspects, much like Mo does.
Well, let she who is without sin, Oliver. Let she who is without sin.
We're all terrible people.
I mean,
look, all I'm saying is Lois is the best character in the book.
all right, but before we cut Carlos off, he had something to say.
Carlos did have something to say.
Oh, even just like the fact, like Mo and Sydney as like a pair of characters who like have debates on, you know, from both a capitalist and an anti-capitalist lens isn't something that you see in the United States. It's just sort of the assumption that capitalism is the only form of economic organization that makes any sense. And like having a public debate is like unheard of, like outside of this strip and like going to see Noam Chomsky or Howard Zinn speak. Like,
Well, so how does moving to the suburb prevent us from having that discussion?
no, I don't think it necessarily does.
Okay.
I guess I'm sort of parroting Mo in that, like, like what are we doing this for? Like, how do we I think it is sort of a question also, like this strip asks, like, how do we organize a society? Like, like as an active debate. And I think maybe a queer space was better positioned to do that. Like having been forced like to the margins, and then like when the strip was being written, like having like small, like, or off and on having chances to like re-assimilate. And that's sort of like the Tony and Clarice storyline overall.
Yeah. I think Stewart is the biggest villain in this. You know, he does this.
Who is?
Stuart? Why, Keith? Why for?
What?
Why?
Oh, but he does like these performative things, but then he also will just.
Are they, though? Are they?
I mean, he sells their car without asking his. I mean, he does all sorts of things without asking his partner. You know, it's like, oh, this guy's so frustrating.
I think Stuart and Mo are both kind of like positioned to sort of represent the very sort of like idealistic yet also grating form of political awareness that is like activism kind of purely out of, I don't know, purely out of ideology without any real consideration for like practicality.
Who do you see in the book that doesn't do that? I genuinely am curious.
I don't know. I don't.
To my usual sarcasm, but who do you?
I think. I think the character, like all of the characters, are to some extent idealistic, and they're all to some extent principled. But I do think some characters are more realistic about it than others. I don't know. I think Clarice and Tony both are a little bit more grounded compared to somebody like Mo, and also Sparrow as well, because there's someone where instead of just like fretting constantly about the American right and like getting really worked up about, you know, buying organic products at the supermarket, they're a little more like involved in direct action. They're a little more directly involved with like, you know, legal conflict and with like grassroots activism and things of that nature.
Yeah, so yeah, because if I recall, Sparrow worked in a shelter.
Yes,
and
the book never doesn't really focus on her a whole lot until kind of later on in the comic, which is a little bit of a shame.
Mm-hmm.
Though to be fair, Mo also worked with a shelter.
Did she? Okay.
On the page where she was building out her resume, working with a shelter, I forget what she did with them, but working with a shelter was on her list of previous jobs.
Loved Mo's grievances about how the gay pride parade was too mainstream. It was like Oh, so
It's
they're
true
actually
though.
doing it.
It's tragically true though. It's true though.
That has not changed at all.
No.
It's only gotten worse.
Mhm.
DC Pride is like just bank and military floats. It's awful.
There's probably some churches in there as well.
Probably, I'm sure.
What,
DC United
what
Baptist.
would make it less mainstream? I mean, what would it look like if it wasn't mainstream?
I mean, I guess I don't know. I'm a little. I mean, caveat though, I have not been to a Pride in like a long time.
Okay.
So just to say, like, I'm not necessarily sure I would commit to saying that that's a bad thing. I guess.
I think it would. There's this divergence that I've heard, and I want to make sure I get it right. And I'm not going to. But between like older,
It's all right.
so I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to fuck it up.
Go.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
But this divergence between like older queers and younger queers, and like the older queers, a lot of what they fought for was the freedom to do.
Mm-hmm.
And younger queers are more fighting for like the freedom to not be done to. And like, so older queers are like, older prides were like a lot about sex and the ways that was presented through kink and sexual and like leather and things. And that's why you had like a bunch of naked leather daddies and fucking jock straps with their asses hanging out at pride marches early on. And
Right.
now that it's like,
They're not gone. I mean, they're still there.
They're still there.
I've seen them.
Right. But as we have moved, it's more a freedom to not be done to and not have hate crimes done against you, right?
Okay.
At least kind of in this logic. And so it's more of what this generation is fighting for more is a different struggle. And so like pride still exists in a way, but like now it's, instead of being kind of this outward expression of I get to fuck whoever I want to fuck, it's now you don't get to fuck with me.
I get it.
It's this kind of more insular, don't come in here, don't cause violence against our crew. And so to your question, Mike, what would a less assimilationist pride be? I think that depends what generation you ask. And I think older queers, and this also is like, has to do with like losing so many older queers into the AIDS crisis, right? That we don't have a lot of elders and mentors and people holding up institutions. And so there's definitely like some survivalism bias, or selection bias. There might be an argument that a less assimilationist pride would be more in your face about we're here, we're queer, and we're going to do what we want, and you can't stop us. That might be a less assimilationist pride, but again, like a newer generation will have a different take on that.
Sense. I thought you did fine explaining that.
Good. I didn't get the dichotomy 100% down, but I got the idea behind it, I think.
June, why can't you be representative of the entire LGBTQ plus community?
Because Patrick,
I'm sorry, what?
You're right. But anyway,
one character that there was the religious character, the very young.
yes. Oh my God, I loved her. She's so terrible.
Yeah.
The Republican lesbian.
I mean,
who joins the CIA.
There had to be one in there, right? Like I feel like
Yeah.
we could not have had her in.
You had to
Feels
have
a little more
the John McCain lesbian.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
her name is Caitlyn Jenner. Thank you.
Oh,
I
That's
felt
fired.
it less like they're all stock characters, but there's like a certain familiarity to them, and she was felt like the least realistic one. It was like, oh, yeah, it's like, yeah, you need something like this in here. And so it was added, but I felt like it just did not, yeah, like all the other characters, like I said, there was like a familiarity and realism to them, and this was like, this was the most arch character, and most, it felt like it was kind of like a checklist character. Like, I should have this because I guess they exist. I don't know any, I don't.
No, but they do exist. Like, a lot of them exist.
The log cabin Republicans.
Like, it's a thing.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that this portrayal it was a little off for me. It just didn't.
It didn't seem quite as like grounded in actual experience as the other characters. Is that what you're saying? Like it seemed more that like, I think what Keith is trying to say here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Keith, is that this character didn't seem like she was based so much on like a real person that the author knew, but more like this hypothetical person that the author had heard about but had never actually met someone like this.
Right. It's like, log cabin Republicans, they realize like, yeah, no, this is probably a bad deal for us, but we still want to be here. We want, but at least the ones that I've met, but it's like this character is like, let's get married right now, and that will be all okay. It was like, why did nobody wants to be like, you know what, this is our second date, we should just get married? Like, that sounds like a good, it just felt, like the least grounded character.
Did it feel like she was like a stereotype or trope that was thrown in just to make a point?
I mean, like, she'll also not like, I felt like she would miss things, like, I don't know what the point of the character was, because it didn't feel real. It was like, like there would be like some glimpses where it's like, it was really hard for me to come out because my family is very conservative, and it's like, yeah, that rings true. But then when she's like, no, Reaganomics, it's so great, and it's great, it'll be great for the gay community, when we all need to embrace this. And I'm like,
I feel like, so something that like Bechdel is very obviously trying to do with this comic is try to represent a very wide array of lesbians, and like try to, as best as she can, fairly represent these like different aspects of these different, I don't know, subcultures, I guess you could say, within the lesbian community. Like you have sort of the more kind of high-minded academic lesbians. You have lesbians of color, you have drag kings, you have trans lesbians, you have and I feel like this specific character was essentially supposed to represent like, oh, here's this like very small subsection of lesbians that are kind of like stereotypical Republicans.
But I feel like it's a common characteristic of the characters that are like, they're all portrayed in a way that's very exaggerated. So I don't. Yes. So I mean, I don't think that any of these characters. I mean, it's not a biography. That's her other book. Like it's not a biography. So I feel like that character didn't feel as real or as fake as the other ones did to me. Like they're all just sort of in the same register of like, they're being portrayed exaggeratedly, because at the end of the day, it's like a comedic thing that she's trying to do.
Right. Yeah, I think like a lot of the characters do to some extent feel sort of exaggerated, and she's definitely like poking fun at a lot of her own characters. I feel like she is doing a lot of like poking fun at sort of the left-wing tendency to like catastrophize and to have this like neurotic fixation on, possible future dangers and things going badly. I think it's, I don't know, I get the sense that it's like something that she does, but she's like self-aware about it. That's the impression I get. So are we nearing the end here, or do we want to, are there any discussion questions that have jumped out that people want to visit before we end here?
I don't know. How do people feel about the progression of the artwork? Because
I like the art a lot in this book.
There's an improvement definitely that you can tell, and that I appreciated. Like it's cool to see like that wide range of time that you see her develop as an artist.
And the early art definitely has that like zine quality to it. And then and the art never really like radically changes, but it gets a lot more crisp.
It's stylized, right?
Yeah, a lot more defined. Yeah.
It looks like she's using a felt tip pen on the first portion of the book. I mean, the thickness of the lines, they're all exactly the same thickness.
Yeah.
The positioning of the characters, their body language is pretty much unchanged, but that's usually the way most artists are. They don't really evolve much as far as their composition. But if you just compare like in the beginning, the introduction to those first few pages, I mean, there's such a contrast. I mean, she's using like halftone, all sorts of perspectives that are changing as far as where the camera angle is. With those first few drawings from '87, everything is pretty much straight from the point of view of the artist to what she's looking at. She's very talented, though. I tell you, I would kill to be able to draw as well as she does.
It's I did read about her process a little bit, at least for her graphic novel. She would take photos of herself in like wearing the clothes and in position, but that is, I don't know or think that she actually did that a whole lot for the comic, but for her graphic novel, she would take photos of herself wearing the clothes, like pose. Which is also part of the reason that the graphic novel took so long and why she stopped doing the strip regularly. She must have experimented with that before, to be, if you're going to commit to something that's going to take years and it's done in a specific style, it's like, it's honestly, it becomes more comic strippy the longer it goes on. Like the first ones, it's just kind of like you said, it's just like a almost, and then towards the end, it's like it eventually morphs into like a regular like what you would see on a comics page. Although this never would have appeared on any comics page.
That's for sure.
So I guess I would just want to possibly round out the discussion with question 10, Oliver. How would you answer her question? Have I churned out episodes of this comic every 2 weeks for decades merely to prove that we're the same as everyone else?
Yes. I did actually have one question that before we round out the discussion, I had one other one that I did just want to ask real quick. since I have not read either Fun Home or Are You My Mother, does for those of you who have read one or the other or both, do they like inform this book? Do they like change your understanding of it? Do they like contextualize this book in some way or not?
Like they're so different, but I guess I could say that like it's of a piece. Like so this Alison Bechdel is like even though they're so different, like it's easy to recognize that they were conceived of by the same brain, I guess. Even though like I think they're just so different though.
Gotcha.
And again, for the thousandth time, I've only read the first quarter of this book, and I'm going to say no. I think to Patrick's point, it's absolutely like, yes, they're obviously from the same brain, Essential Dykes and Fun Home and Are You My... There's very clear lines through them all, connecting them all. But through that first quarter of the book, no. I didn't find anything about Mo or really any of the other characters informed by my readings of either of those books.
Okay. Just curious. So yeah, to Pat's question, to revisit Alison Bechdel's question, which got cut off in the chat. So I'll have to go back to the beginning of the book here. Have I churned out episodes of this comic strip every 2 weeks for decades merely to prove that we're the same as everyone else? I would say in some ways, yes. In some ways, no.
I just, it's such a, like, I feel like it's a question that needs more unpacking. Like, same in what way? Like, we're all messy human beings, but that just feels so like so generalized and kind of surfacey lame. Like what does she mean? Like same as everyone else?
Yeah, and I want to answer, but like all of my friends are characters in Essential Dykes, so like yeah, same as everyone else, which is oh shit.
But I feel like there's a very like loaded, like there's a certain emotional register that she's in when she's asking that question, which in my read is something maybe like is the end goal of it assimilation? Like, is that it? But I mean, because like you could answer that question, but I also feel like there's a like an evaluative component to it. Like answering one way or the other would have different like emotional registers for her, I feel like. Because you can just answer it as a factual question, like, yeah, sure, indeed.
It's also kind of like a story arc for like all minority groups is just, there's these arch stereotypes, and then eventually it's just like, they're people too. So,
although now that I think about it, I do think that maybe it's not, because what's interesting with all of her characters, like even when we get to the very end, is like they have this very, I'm not sure if the word's an uncomfortable, contested, like they have an unsettled relationship with this concept of monogamy.
Yes.
So like I think in that respect, like we're not the same as everyone else. Like that's still a thing that's still being negotiated.
Yeah, a lot of the tension. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Patrick, I think what you're talking about is kind of one of the things that I thought about when I read that question. There are similarities between her community and a straight community. Many of the challenges that they face are the same. And if we want to see it as a function of assimilation or not, I guess we could, have a discussion on that. But I did see a difference in her community and a straight community, and that in large part, in a straight community, there's more of a anxiety about becoming pregnant and having children that I didn't see driving decisions as much, but I only read the first quarter of the book. So I know that some of the characters do have children, but it's not like children happen by accident in that community like they happen in the straight community. And I think that
with one specific character in this book, it does, but
that's right.
Oh, I haven't gotten that far. But I think that the idea of children are what drive straight couples into monogamy and keep them, not so much now as in the olden days, but keep couples together. They're doing it for the kids. They want the kids to have two parents. They're taking care of them. It's much easier to economically to make ends meet when you have two parents than just one. So I think that's a dynamic that's present with straight couples that the lesbian couples don't have that. And when they don't have that, I think then they struggle with like, well, why do we have to stay together? And I saw, them sleeping with other couples, and while there's a lot of drama that comes out of that, it's not, there wasn't unintended consequences relating to being pregnant present like there is in other dramas. I don't know. Those are just some thoughts that went through my head while I read that question.
Yeah, if I could,
I think that's a good point.
On that, and I kind of have to like extrapolate from how I perceive my community to be separate from more mainstream communities, or straight communities, or however we want to do phrasings here. And because I find so much of this book really relevant to like my today's networking. And I think the answer to Bechdel's question is yes and no, right? As so many things are, that yes, we're just as interpersonally messy and problematic and confused and struggling as everyone else, right? But we do have, and this is drawn throughout the book, a different approach to what community is and to what family is and what relationships are and what fidelity is, where in that the bit that I read, the only time that any of the characters' family shows up is like when Clarice goes back, or Antonia goes back to Mexico or whatever, and like sees her parents, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's very little nuclear family, and their family is each other, right? So this is like in its own way a family drama. It's the roommates who live together. It's the workers who work together, and they're facilitating community in that way. And this very like, in a lot of them, I feel like a lot of their struggles with fidelity, they phrase in this like monogamous and non-monogamous dichotomy. But a lot of them I feel like are struggling through relationship anarchy without the words, which is like, we all just love each other, and like, why are we fucking putting labels on it? We're going to sleep with who we want to sleep, and no one owns us, and we all get to do what is right for us. Kind of, it's good to think of other people's feelings, but other people don't control and own us in the way that marriage is designed to exert some control, right? Whether or not the individual players in marriage are trying to exert control over another, like marriage as an institution is designed as such. And And so in that way, no, I don't think Bechdel spent 25 years making this to say we're all the same. We are interpersonally, messily the same, but we are communally different still, I think. And I think Bechdel's work shows that. It shows that really, really well, as you so eloquently said, Mike.
It's almost, to me, it's almost like it's not a question of monogamy. It's a question of fidelity and of being true to those who you choose to be in relationship with. The honesty needs to be there. It's not a commitment that's driven by the law, you know, like there's, and still are in some states, I guess, laws about like, well, you're not allowed to sleep with this person. You can't have this kind of relationship with that person. It's more about driven by a sense of doing the right thing to those that you decide to have a relationship with, which to me speaks more of fidelity than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that like these people are all worrying about the fidelity, and like the people in my life worry about fidelity more than any other relationship term. And no one's out there saying fidelity, but like I feel like that is at the core of how we're defining and operating all of our interpersonal relationships. Yeah. Whether or not we're putting partner or girlfriend or roommate or whatever on or whatever on whatever label we're putting on, like foundationally we're talking about fidelity.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say to kind of expound. I think the things like that are the same are like, I think it shows that the community has all the same like human impulses and like drives and foibles as everyone else, but the specific circumstances in which those come out are different, is kind of, I think, the way I would probably think of it. So yeah, I think maybe on that note, unless anybody has anything else they wanted to add. Did you have something to say, Keith?
People, like, I was kind of down on this for not being that funny. I mean, it was pretty light, but some of the jokes I thought were...
There were a couple jokes that did make me laugh out loud in this book.
There were several for me.
Okay. Like I never read this. When I was reading this, I was like, I wasn't. It pulled me in, but I was never like, I found more groaners than ones that actually made me laugh. So. I don't know. Was that just me and my peccadillos? And it's that's what I would read the comics for, and that's why I was like trolling around. I was like, and I would come across this and be like,
Sunday funny is more like the Sunday groaners.
Yeah. I don't know. Did anyone else like really appreciate the humor, or was it?
I enjoyed it.
I mean, I laughed, so mission accomplished, I would say.
Yeah, I think a lot of the groaners for me were like, so bad they're good sometimes. Right? Like I felt like they were sometimes intentionally bad.
Yeah. It's not like quite the level of like a dad joke bad, but it's like huge setup. Yeah.
I mean, most comics do not. There were a few jokes in this book that did make me laugh out loud, which is more than most comics do. I'll say that.
So, it is hard to do jokes in writing because so much of it is timing. So reading it, but yeah, I loved comics and comic strips as a kid, which is, like I said, why I ended up, searching out even more sources. So
I guess it also helped that like I knew and probably still know a lot of people who have like similar characteristics as folks in the book. And so the fact that she's needling them and poking fun at them is something I appreciated and also found funny because of that.
Yeah. And then I also, real quick, like there aren't a whole lot of plots other than like, you know, people sleeping with each other, or I guess, you know, I just wanted to share that, like, I thought my favorite plot was almost in the background, it's kind of a spoiler, but Lois falling into responsibility. Like, you know, it's like...
Oh, I love Lois. Lois is my favorite character in this book.
She becomes the general manager. Good for her. Of the borders, not borders.
Bounders books.
Bounders, excuse me. Sydney, my favorite. Sydney.
Also, like,
it should be Binders. I really wish it was Binders.
Oh my God, it
Binders full of women. Oh my God.
But okay. Also, so first, pour one out for Borders. I know they probably like they were bad, but it's still, I went there a lot as a kid. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Rest in peace.
I have one of their bookshelves from their going out of business sale. But I don't know. I loved Lois a lot. Lois was my favorite character.
Yeah, like when she starts raising the kid, like she's never asked to do it.
She
never volunteers to do it. She just starts doing it and then assumes more and more responsibility.
So Lois is like the only one that actually like supports, like fully supports Jasmine. Like a lot of the other characters are like weird or like kind of shitty about it, and Lois is the only one that actually like fully supports her.
Sorry, for context, is that the trans character?
Yes. So Jasmine, so Lois starts dating a woman called, what was her name? It was another J name. Not Jazana, not Jasmine. Jolana, I don't remember. She starts dating this woman, and this woman has a son who is kind of effeminate, and it becomes like increasingly clear that this like young boy is actually a trans woman, and this character begins like transitioning and starts taking puberty blockers and starts taking hormones, and a lot of the other characters are like really weird about it, like Stuart, who is dating Sparrow. He's like, I don't think you should encourage this kid's gender confusion, and even like this person's own mother is like weird about it.
It's so weird for him because I'm like, that is the border for you, Stuart.
Yeah, right.
You right now, look, you just sold your goddamn car for like, and that is the limit of your like progressive values.
Yeah. But Lois is the only one that fully supports this character.
That's because Lois has big daddy energy.
She does.
I mean, yeah, for real.
Totally does.
Also, I don't know if you got to the part where like Lois becomes literally a drag king.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I'm 0% surprised. Once they got that Perot haircut, I was all
saw it coming.
I just love Sydney because she called them out in the way that I would, and I just appreciate that energy that she has. Sydney stand for life.
Her you know, it's just like, I want the biggest TV, and when you get the big TV, you got to get the surround sound system.
That's right.
Maybe that's the reason I don't like Sydney as much, because like I know someone, like I'm very closely related to someone who is a compulsive shopper and like shops as a form of like therapy, and like literally has a shopping addiction. So maybe that's why I didn't like Sydney. Maybe it hits a little too close to home. I don't know.
Yeah, that's my family right there. But yeah, I liked her weird relationship with her dad, where they're like,
Sydney's dad is great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, just repeats of each other. It's just weird mirror images of each other, and it was just like great seeing the two of them together. So yeah, no, Sydney starts off like really antagonistic,
Yes.
unpleasant, and then like I don't know if the author intended for her to become Mo's significant other, because like she shows up and it's like they have not only like are the opposites attract, but they're like so unpleasant, and they're like, I can't stand anything about you. And these are all the reasons why you're wrong. It's not, and then it's just all of a sudden it's like,
maybe that's why it works. Maybe that's why it works.
Character softens like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like I didn't understand when the character first showed up. I was like, if nobody likes this character, why are they hanging out with her so much? So, none of them have to be around her. And they all talk about how much they don't like her, but then it's like, just try and change her real quick and soften her up a bit. It was just like all this know-it-all and pedantry, and then a lot of that disappears, and it becomes like, oh, she's a really big into consumer culture, and like that's it was a weird, not weird, but like it was a big shift in her character, and I was like, was that always the intention that she would become Mo's significant other?
I think Bechdel is really good at portraying characters, and I kind of said a similar thing back when we read One Soul. But I think she's very good at portraying characters that are both deeply flawed,
Mm-hmm.
but also sympathetic.
I just meant, I felt that there was nothing sympathetic about Sydney at first.
At first, no.
And then, like, the things that made her, this character were not there originally. It just, I guess you can, like, it's like, is there someone in her life that she just really hates and she's going to shit on them in her comic? Like she's just like, I've got this comic. I hate this person. I'm just going to talk about how awful they are. And then it was like, oh, maybe not. Maybe it was me who was wrong. But that was like, that felt like I don't know. I guess it's one of those things where it's like, one of the advantages of when you read this in 400 comics, it's like of something that was written across 20 plus years. Like, it wasn't all plotted out. Things change and modify on the, as you write it. And I've heard people who write fiction before. It was like, I don't really know this character until I write them. So, I felt with that character, that specific character, and that part, it was like it was just a big change. It felt like, it really did feel like when Sydney first appeared, that there's just someone that the author just really hated, inserted them, and just
Yeah.
like, person's such an asshole. They're so pretentious.
Yeah. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up, unless anybody has any final points that they wanted to make. Going once, going twice. All right. So I think we can go ahead and jump into our final scores. I will go ahead and start out. I'm still kind of like hovering around a 9. I'm not totally sure if I want to commit to the 9 or not. So I guess I'll leave it at an 8.75. But I will say that I did very much enjoy this book. I think it still feels incredibly modern and relevant, sometimes depressingly so. And I am glad I got to read it. So with that, why don't we jump to Pat?
I think I will increase it to an 8. I really enjoyed reading it, and I really appreciated this very sort of anthropological journey through the world of Alison Bechdel and her friends. Mike, go ahead.
I'm going to go with a solid 8. The discussion, I think, has given me more motivation to keep working at it. And I'll probably do, I don't know, maybe like 10 or 12 pages a day until I get done with this. And looking forward to meeting the new characters that you guys talked about. So that's where I'm at. And I will go with June.
It's great because I just want to double up your point, Mike. I gave it a 6.
16?
I gave it a 6. But I don't want the TERFs to find me. And
we will protect you. We will protect you from those.
I'm very online, and it will be a problem. It's already happened. So, there's a phrasing Cheryl Strayed used, and I can never remember it right, but I think it's retrospective happiness, where like a thing was not great when you did it, but afterwards you remember it very fondly. Mm-hmm. She's the author who wrote Wild, about the woman who hiked the Appalachian Trail, for anyone who's not familiar. And like she hated that trip, but like afterwards was very happy she did it. And that's kind of how I feel about this book. Like I kind of enjoyed reading it, but I didn't really have any desire to finish. But I'm really looking back with a little more distance, and like because I read what I read this week, and like didn't really have some mental distance until talking about it more. I'm really glad I read it. So I will hold my 6 for the essential Dykes to watch out for as a read. However, for Dykes to watch out for as a sometimes read, which I did not plan to finish, but I'm with Mike and like really feel like maybe I'll read a few here and there and like work through it over like maybe the course of a year. I'm going to give Dykes to watch out for a 9. Carlos?
I'm going to give it a 9. I think, I don't know. I really like Bechdel's work in general. I think that there's a lot of craft that goes into what she does. And also, like I said, like, there was a question about how like Fun Home informs. I don't think it does, or like how they inform each other. I don't think it does, but I do think that it like provides a really interesting contrast. And, you know, I'm deeply impressed by being able to pull off like a really good weekly strip and also like a really intense autobiographical memoir. So I'm going to keep it at a 9. And Alexander, go ahead.
So I gave it a 7.5. I think I'll up it to an 8. And I agree with Juniper and Mike. I'll probably try to finish it over the year. But I very much appreciated the discussion. I enjoyed being here. Keith, how about you?
I'll raise my score to 7.5 because you guys have opened my eyes to this book. I was kind of down on that. I was like, I liked it, but it was like, appreciated some of the context, going back on some of this stuff. Yeah.
Keith went into this discussion. He was like, lesbians suck. And now he's like, maybe they're okay.
Maybe they're all right, those lesbians.
I love you, Keith. So I think, I think we can. So I think that's it then. I will say for those who said that they are interested in continuing to read it, I do highly recommend you do so. I do think it goes in some really interesting directions. One thing I will warn you about is it does, like this specific book, does end sort of anticlimactically. Like it just sort of ends. Like there isn't really a lot of conclusion to the various plot arcs that are going on. It's just like here's all these different plot threads, and oh, we're done. So just
Oh,
like be
okay.
prepared for that. Don't like expect those plot threads to wrap up, because they don't. So that's what I'll say, but I do still recommend you continue reading. But what is our book for next month that we have coming
Real
up?
quick, she stopped doing the comic strip so that she could work on her graphic novels. She did kind of try and wrap up some stuff. She published one comic in 2016 when Trump was elected.
Yes.
So if you want to see a conclusion, you can find that online.
Okay, but I before we do the preview, I just want to say I was okay with that ending, because
Yeah.
I just sort of like, well, their lives will probably continue even after we stop reading about them. So in that way, that made sense to me.
Yeah. There's a lot of things where they try and like wrap up things like perfectly, and I was like, no, it's life goes on. It's never gonna have an ending.